Good afternoon, students. This is Dr. Bryson for another video for the Introduction to Criminal Justice class. I'm not going to have a PowerPoint presentation. It's just going to be me on the screen for this particular discussion. But I wanted to talk a little bit and add my 2 pennies worth for the section in Chapter 1 of your textbook, A System of Checks and Balances. In this particular section, the authors talk about the individual liberty versus the social civility and the crime control versus due process. They also talk about some other competing ideologies. But I wanted to make a video on that section just to address due process and individual rights. Many times people will ask me if I'm a conservative or am I a progressive, so what am I? I don't know if this is the best analogy, but I consider myself to be more like Chief Justice Earl Warren. Now, there was Governor of California, Earl Warren. Before that, there was Prosecuting Attorney of California, Earl Warren. But when he became Chief Justice, being appointed by President Eisenhower back in the early 50s, the first case that he became involved with was Brown v. Board of Education. That was the U.S. Supreme Court's decision that desegregated public schools in the United States. Chief Justice Earl Warren, because he was now the Chief Justice, so he was kind of the leader of the Supreme Court, he went about trying to build consensus. In his own memoirs and in his other papers, when he talked about the Brown v. Board of Education decision, he knew that most of the justices were going to vote for desegregation in that particular case. But he wanted to make sure that they all understood the principles behind that. During the few years before Chief Justice Earl Warren took the bench with the United States Supreme Court, in this country, we had a thing called McCarthyism. Senator Joseph McCarthy and his House or his Committee on Un-American Activities. McCarthy would bully people. He would try to get them to give him names. Some of those individuals were held in contempt of Congress. It took almost 10 years for some of those contempt of Congress cases to finally make it to the U.S. Supreme Court. Many of those individuals were known communists. They actually were communists. McCarthy was not wrong in accusing them of being so. Under Chief Justice Warren, those individuals were exonerated for free speech. Eisenhower, after he left the Oval Office, less than a year before he died, lamented that he had appointed Chief Justice Earl Warren to the Supreme Court because of, quote, those cases with the Reds. Before he passed, Chief Justice Warren wrote his memoirs and he explained some things. And in his memoirs, he explained that he was fine with President Eisenhower, who was a politician, and in the role of president, that was a political role. He was fine with Eisenhower trying to negotiate, trying to find a middle ground, trying to find a compromise solution. One of Eisenhower's complaints against Warren was that he wanted segregation to happen too quickly, and that the Brown v. Board of Education decision should not have been as radical as it was. To this point, Warren responded that the court takes the cases that it gets. and it must decide the case on the principles involved, period. Whether it's too fast or too slow, when they get those cases, they have to decide them the right way regardless. What I appreciate about Earl Warren is that he was one of the leaders of the anti-communist movement immediately after World War II, and even before World War II. He was definitely not a communist. In many ways, he was a conservative, although when he ran for governor of California, there was a time when he was both on the Democrat and Republican primary tickets. But Chief Justice Warren was looking at the principle. And when he looked at the actual principle, the principle upon which the United States was founded, he had to decide in favor of individual rights. Once John F. Kennedy was elected president, there were a few more appointees from President Kennedy. There had been more appointees from President Eisenhower. And there were some cases involving the same issues with communists that got to the court, and they were defeated by a 5-4 vote, meaning narrowly defeated. So the new makeup of the US Supreme Court decided against the free speech of those who claim to be communists. And what they cited was that national security outweighed individual rights. What they failed to identify was how a communist simply exercising their free speech jeopardized national security. If free speech jeopardizes national security, so we can simply say you don't have a right to it anymore, that's kind of a scary proposition to me. Earl Warren understood that the US Constitution, the Bill of Rights, was added to the Constitution for the express purpose of protecting individual rights. And so he was focused on defending the Constitution as he ought to have. Now, there may be some folks that they actually do something that very clearly jeopardizes national security. Yes, I get that we are going to have to weigh that. I can't remember which of the founding fathers of the US said, I believe it was Benjamin Franklin, but I'm not certain, said that any people that would compromise rights for a sense of safety deserve neither. Now, having said that, when we talk about the due process model versus the crime control model, there was a time when I was very much a believer in the crime control model. I was much younger. I hadn't had as much experience in the criminal justice system. But then I began to think, what if someone accused me of a crime that I did not commit and I didn't have due process? What if you are accused of a crime that you did not commit and you were not afforded due process? So let's say that you took this to the US Supreme Court and they said, well, no, you weren't afforded due process, but that doesn't matter because national security is more important in the balance of things. And you're stepping back thinking, but I didn't commit the crime. How can me being innocent and being accused of committing a crime jeopardize national security? I want every student in the classes that I teach to understand that due process is so important to a free society. And the US purports to be a free society. Now, I don't want to get into any kind of political arguments, but my own take is that the US had wonderful ideals upon which it was founded. But as I have studied US history, especially within the criminal justice system, it scares me how little we have lived up to the values that we purport to own. This is where due process comes into play. what I'm hoping that we will learn as criminal justice professionals is that due process is not some abstract principle. It is something that we have to apply to every individual equally. It's what we call the Equal Protection Clause that was placed in the 14th Amendment. Now, we're going to talk about these amendments in another video, some of these amendments and how that plays out. But I'm hoping that the students watching this will understand that it is not due process simply to convict someone on the accusation alone, no matter how much the accusation is true. Due process requires that we have evidence to convict someone. So I can't accuse you of cheating and get you kicked out of school unless I have evidence that you have cheated. You might be a bad student and somehow end up making good grades. You might be someone who never reads and might make good grades. I might have very strong evidence that you are a person who has cheated. But if I don't, strong suspicion. But if I don't have the strong evidence that you've cheated, I'm not going to accuse you of it. Now, I might call you in and say, hey, I suspect, right? But see, we've got to have the evidence. So accusing someone of something, even if they did it, you might be the victim and you were there and saw that they did this to you. But without the evidence, and it's simply your report, no matter how much you're telling the truth, we have to be very careful because due process demands evidence. What I'm trying to get you to see in this video is that as you read through this section of the textbook, that none of us wants to be subjected to a lack of due process. And if we don't want it, we should practice the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Now, some people say, well, there's a better one, treat others the way they want to be treated. Well, when we say treat others the way you want to be treated, that's included in that. In other words, I want to be treated in such a way that people figure out how I want to be treated and treat me that way. And we need to do that for others as well. We need to treat them with the same respect, unless we don't mind being treated with disrespect. But we need to treat them with the same respect that every human being deserves to be treated, including ourselves. That means we cannot compromise due process. Now, I'm going to make one more point, and I want you all to really pay attention to this. Because in my experience as an expert witness in the court system, and I've testified in a lot of cases, and if you talk to any attorney, and especially civil attorneys and prosecuting attorneys, it doesn't matter what really happened. What matters is what I can prove in court. The unfortunate thing is, in court, we're proving it to human beings who can be easily manipulated. What I'm going to ask you to do as criminal justice professionals is don't take the attitude, it doesn't matter what really happened, it matters what I'm able to prove. Take the attitude, it matters what really happened. Because when I'm investigating a crime, I want to make sure that I don't send the wrong person to prison or get the wrong person convicted, maybe to get probation. But I don't want the wrong person to be convicted. It has to be about more than what I can prove. And it has to be about more than what I feel in my heart. I have to be willing to suspend my preconceptions and focus on what really happened, and be willing to say, based on the evidence, I don't know what happened if the evidence doesn't give me that. The evidence might say it suggests this person did it, but it's not enough to say this person did it unequivocally. So be willing to say, I don't know. We'll see you all next video.